Now, plans to force councils to reinstate weekly rubbish collections are being shelved. Community Secretary Eric Pickles had hoped to include the measure in the government's waste review. But in an embarrassing U-turn, he's been forced to admit that he can't make local councils bring in the costly changes. Introducing the findings of the cross-department review, the about making sense.
We formed a government with another party in our coalition agreement. We commit ourselves to try and increase the frequency and quality of refuse collection, but I think it's no secret that we've come into government and the country is severely indebted. It's worse than we thought, and we've had to make savings. But nonetheless, we will support councils that want to increase the frequency and quality of the refuse, because we want to do the right thing.
Welcomed the about turn, believing that fewer collections will encourage people to recycle more.
Yes, debate about how you collect rubbish, and what we would say is that councils all over the country are managing to collect the residual black bag waste once a fortnight. And in our view, if they're collecting food waste every week to get the real smelly stuff out, then that can be a good thing to do. It can be a lot cheaper than collecting every week, and also it increases recycling rates.
Well, local authorities are under pressure to meet tough EU recycling targets or face big fines, but different collection methods can be confusing. In Wales, households are given an average of 5 different bins to divide up their waste, while in England, an average of 4 are issued. But one of the most complicated systems is in Newcastle-under-Lyme, where residents are given 9 bags and boxes plus 2 bags for food waste. Well, Sky's Gerard Tubb is at a waste plant in Bradford, up to his knees in rubbish by the looks of things. Gerard, over to you.
Welcome to the waste of Leeds and Bradford. Some of this stinking rubbish comes from fortnightly bin collections. Some of it comes from weekly bin collections. It's here, thousands of tons of it, because this company helps to sort it out. Interestingly, those figures that we just heard about councils that are requiring people to have lots of different bins and bags to sort their rubbish into, they think here that won't last long, because eventually plants like this will be able to do the job for you. All you have to do is put your rubbish in one bin and they'll sort it out. But there's a problem, and Tim Shapcott, the Director of Associated Waste Management, will tell us what that problem is. The problem is food, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. I've got a good example here of contaminated waste.
Show me.
Coming from municipal waste. We open a bag. Obviously, this bag here, we've got some valuable. There's a pop bottle which has value, plastic value, of course. Some other yogurt tin here, yogurt pots. We have cardboard and other bits of plastic. Again, it has value. Unfortunately, it's contaminated with this food material here, food waste, vegetables. We've got other bits of cabbage here, God knows what, and some green waste, weeds and grass cuttings, obviously.
So the government in this waste review is saying that it wants to look at anaerobic digestion, composting, if you like.
Yeah.
That is linked to that. That's the stuff they're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly AWM would certainly support Caroline Spellman's strategy in trying to develop further AD infrastructure within the UK. If we could do that and separate the organic matter from households at source, effectively, the rest materials, which are predominantly packaging materials, are plants, and plants like this could readily sort that material.
Okay, Tim, thank you very much indeed. So the message from here is, eventually, in a few years' time, we won't need to sort our own waste, except we will need to put food waste in another bin and let businesses like this sort the rest out.
Gerard Tubb, thank you. Now, Green campaigners have welcomed the government's decision not to reinstate weekly bin collections, but there's also been criticism that they're putting savings before issues that matter to people. So should weekly bin collections have been reinstated? Well, let's discuss this. Here with me are Matthew Sinclair, who's the Director of the TaxPayers Alliance, and waste campaigner Julian Kirby from Friends of the Earth. Good afternoon to you both, gentlemen. Matthew Sinclair from the TaxPayers Alliance, the cost of reintroducing weekly bin collections was deemed too high for an introduction. Do you welcome the decision then, given that taxpayers will be saving money?
I don't think this is about cost. In the end, it hasn't got a lot more expensive to do the rounds every week. This is, in the end, a thing where council taxpayers have seen their bills go nearly double in the last decade, and yet they're being told that basic services are going to have to be cut, and one of the few services which they rely on every week is going to be cut back. And I think the reality is this isn't about anything to do with cuts, because there are lots of services where we can draw priorities in local areas between the need to keep down taxes and what kind of services we can afford. In this case, it was never up for debate. It was decided in Brussels, and then the councils were given these huge landfill targets which made the decision for them. And that's what's incredibly unfair about this decision. If people decided they don't really want fortnightly collections, they'd rather save bit on the council tax, great. They've never been given that option.
Julian Kirby, this is the most basic of council tasks. People pay a lot of council tax. They deserve to have a weekly collection if they want it.
Well, the reality is that people aren't losing out on weekly collections if you look at it. What they're having, where councils have moved to fortnightly waste collections, is very often you have recycling one week and then the black bag waste the other. Many councils have food waste collections every week, so that deals with the hygiene issue. And at Friends of the Earth, we say that if you're going to move to a fortnightly collection, then you must have that weekly food waste collection as well in order to deal with those concerns. By going to fortnightly black bag waste collections, what councils do is they save a lot of money. They save that money because there are fewer trips required, but also because recycling is much cheaper. When you recycle materials, you can get the money back from selling it on. And that actually is what's driving this. The landfill tax is a British invention. It hasn't come from Brussels. It was invented by the last Conservative government, the Environment Minister there, and it's been put up progressively, including by the current Conservative Chancellor, and it's a good thing. We throw away and we burn about
the reason why
£650 million
that tax
worth
is
of recyclable materials a year, so it's
Matthew
great to get that stuff out of landfill.
The reason that tax is so high is because it was originally set at roughly the environmental costs of landfill. It massively increased, and the Institute for Fiscal Studies have written about this. It massively increased because of those EU targets. So you have the European Union setting draconian targets, urged on by groups like Friends of the Earth, who the EU gives nearly £1 million of our money every year in grant funding, and they come down here, they threaten huge fines. In order to meet those, the government sets massive landfill taxes, massively escalates the level of those taxes, and councils feel they have no option but to switch away from weekly collections, a basic service that it was entirely reasonable for ordinary people to expect.
Well, Friends of the Earth, England, Wales and Northern Ireland, who I work for, don't receive any money from Europe. I can't speak from the other groups. But councils are taking these decisions for themselves. And this is what's very interesting about this. What you've had is the government trying to force councils to revert to weekly waste collections, and they've ignored them. Even the self-styled most conservative council in Britain, Waverley Council in Surrey, has stuck with fortnightly waste collections because they see it saves them a lot of money. Now, the savings can actually be used to reinvest in waste collections and diversify the materials that are picked up, and so make those collections even better. So actually, rather than playing politics with waste, I would have thought the Taxpayers Alliance would be on side for reducing the costs of it and getting a better deal for taxpayers.
Matthew Sinclair, sorry to interrupt. I just want to break in here because I want to find out what your view is on this point that Julian Kirby makes, that if you get your food collected every week, so you get rid of that hygiene problem, the pest problem, do you have a problem with your bags being collected every other week? What's the problem with that?
It's just an inconvenience. It's just something which makes it that bit harder for people to manage their waste. They're required to sort their waste into more and more and more bins. And this is becoming much harder for people when it should be becoming so much easier.
So your basic problem is people might have to buy an extra bin to put the rubbish in. Is that your basic problem?
No, it's a massive inconveniences which are building up for people, taking what used to be a very basic, easy service, which is that you put your rubbish in the bin, and turning it into some kind of labour. And doing that at the behest not of individual local decisions. The idea this is some choice which the government is imposing on is an absolute fiction. This is coming out from supranational authorities, from the EU, being imposed on councils and imposed on local people because of a debate happening in Brussels between the European Commission and think tanks like Friends of the Earth, funded by the European Commission.
Julian Kirby, there's no doubt a lot of people want their rubbish collected every week. They think it's unhygienic, they think it's unsightly, they'll have their bins that they can't close. Then they say they get into trouble with the council, they may not collect their rubbish, they may get fined for it. There's an awful lot of people that want their rubbish collected every week. If they pay their council tax, why can't it happen?
Well, you say there's no doubt, but actually I would doubt that. This morning, Matthew was talking to the councillor for Waverley Council in Surrey, who was saying that 90% of his constituents that they've surveyed are actually very happy with the fortnightly service that they've got. And that's replicated nationally, where the RAP, the Waste and Resources Action Programme, a government waste experts body, and the local government association just a couple of years ago found that 80% of people are happy with their waste and recycling services. So it's just not true. And I think that, sadly, you have organisations like the Taxpayers Alliance whipping up a lot of hysteria over this and trying to convince people they're not happy. I mean, on the hygiene issue, again, the issue of rats has been massively exaggerated. We're led to believe there's been a burgeoning plague of them, but it's just that actually hasn't happened. You speak to the experts, if anything, we're seeing a decline in rat populations.
I don't think
so
our
there's a lot of
objective
rubbish
should
talked about rubbish, sadly, including by Matthew.
I don't think that our objective should be to lower people's expectations for waste and recycling services until they're happy with whatever lousy service they get from poor value local government. The idea that people may over time learn to live with fortnightly collections, there's just no need. They should be able to enjoy the kind of convenience that comes with weekly collections. And this is simply something which has been imposed by a debate completely out of touch with the objectives of ordinary people, which has got hung up on an overly simplistic EU target to reduce waste going to landfill, which there was no driving need for. It was created simply out of that overly simplistic target, instead of looking at what waste is it really valuable for us to recycle, what we really need to be able to recycle.
The EU is Matthew's obsession and bugbear, and weekly waste collections are Community Secretary Pickles' obsession and bugbear. I think they're out of touch with the public on both of those, and particularly here on weekly waste collections, you can see that councils and indeed the public aren't obsessed with reverting to weekly collections. If they were, then councils would be reverting to them. Instead, they're pushing in the opposite direction.
Okay, I'm going to have to interrupt. I'm so sorry, gentlemen, but we are out of time. I'm not going to be able to stop Matthew, am I? Matthew Sinclair, I think Julian Kirby is in the same office, so perhaps you can carry on this discussion in a few moments when we're off air. But for now, thank you both.
Thank you.